Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Baggage Claim, a journey into mental illness. I'm Katrina.
I'm Julia, and this is a show about living with mental health in today's society.
And if you have, obviously this is a mental health show. If you have any triggers or anything like that, we usually try to say something before we go into that topic. But we also have hotlines down below for your resources. And I'll end that with join our Discord because that's there as well.
Great. So tonight's episode is about men, mental health, and stigma. And we have with us as our special guest, Dan. Welcome back, Dan. He was with us last week. And he's back this week. Thanks for joining us, Dan.
You're welcome.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Obviously, my name is Dan. Born and raised in Minnesota. Lived here all of my life. The last year of, as it relates to this show, has been an interesting one. I've learned a lot about mental health and mental illnesses because I've had to live it for the past year. I've gotten some outside help that's been extremely helpful for me, and I'm grateful to be here.
That's awesome. Thank you. We're very glad and welcome. Excuse me.
Yeah, I'll just say
you're here.
I'll just jump in and say that Katrina and I have been hungry to have the male perspective on mental health because we've been, as you can see, a very female-dominated show, and we have just been eager to have someone weigh in with the male perspective. So it's a joy to have you here.
And I want to add on top of that this show is going to talk a lot about stigmas, and that's kind of going to be like where we want to get to. Like, is there a stigma in mental health for men? And can it be seen? That's, yeah.
Yeah.
So beware.
So Dan, as a man, have you ever felt pressure not to ask for help because that would be a sign of weakness and men are supposed to be strong?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know where it actually comes from because I had to think about this in over the past week. Where did I learn this from? And I don't know that I can specifically point to one source or another. I'm fairly certain it didn't come from my parents, so it has to be from peers growing up, social media in the last 10 years, but friends, TV, magazines, those kinds of things. But absolutely, yeah. And it has contributed to the delays that I did in terms of finding help. And unfortunately, it came to a point where I was at it was at a point where I was going to do something permanent or seek help. Which is unfortunate, but that's where I was. And that's where I found out where asking for help is way better than trying to suffer through it. Because I've had a diagnosis for depression for at least a decade, and anxiety more recently than that. But I think the anxiety goes back much further than that. And I got to thinking about it. I think my anxiety goes way back to as far as high school, unbeknownst to myself. But a lot of the social interactions or lack of social interactions I could trace back to anxiety around social interactions with people. And so it's been it goes back a long way.
Do you think if you would have recognized those signs in high school, you would have asked for help? Or would you have ignored it?
Well, I'd like to say that I would have, but the answer is probably no. And a lot of that is because I believe is because of those stigmas. I'm not supposed to be looking for help. I'm a guy. I'm supposed to. That's what women are supposed to do. I don't have those issues. I'm just supposed to push through, and those kinds of things. And so no, even if I had known at the time. Or even suspected at the time, I guess, is probably more accurate, that I probably would not have, unless it came to a point where I was at earlier last year. it may have required an intervention of some sort on my behalf to force me to go or something like that. But no, I even way back in high school or even college, where stress-related emotions and those kinds of things were because of school, and all of those kinds of things should have pointed me in that direction, didn't.
Yeah. I mean, it's just so, to counteroppose that, I remember this so vividly that I was hurting so bad in high school and I didn't know what was wrong. And I remember like just going to my dad and being like, something's wrong and I need help. Right. So it's such a different
Yeah.
relationship with feelings and expressing feelings. And I'm very fascinated by that.
Yeah, I mean, high school and going through puberty and all those kinds of things, the emotional turmoil that all kids go through for that part of their life is a mess anyway. All of us would love to go back and try it again. But I mean, even all of the other stuff that you go through getting through high school, going through college, all of that kind of stuff people have their ups and downs. They naturally do. But I think men, generally speaking, and I'm generalizing, don't go looking for it because of wherever they source it from. They don't think that they can muster through and get out the other end. Now, I mean, to some extent, that does work, but it takes much longer for recovery. But are you better in the end? You could argue that one way or the other.
Yeah. Absolutely. Joseph with a great comment as well. He was too angry in high school to ask for help. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Been there.
Yeah.
Been there. Angry at the world, angry at everybody else, angry at me. I can totally relate to that.
Do you think, knowing you like I know you, I can say that I think you're a pretty sensitive person. So do you think that that is frowned upon? Do you try to hide your sensitivity from the world? Or do you think that that is because I just know you like I know you, so I can say that you're sensitive. But if you're not asking for help because you think there's stigma against it, are you covering up all those feelings of sensitivity too?
To some extent, I think that's true. And I would probably agree with your assessment of a sensitive person. I think that I'm more. I'll say it for me that I may be more in tune with people's moods and emotions that I interact with, and I kind of take that on. To some extent, to kind of empathize with them, and so there's a cost to that for me. But I'm supposed to be that empathetic person and kind of think about their feelings as they're the ones that are hurting. But to some extent, I take that on and start worrying about that person and those kinds of things. It just adds up over time.
Yeah. Do you want me to keep going, Julia?
Sure.
Yeah. This is an interesting question and I'll say after you respond to it. As a man, do you feel pressure to be successful or to be the breadwinner? And does that pressure contribute to any of your mental health?
I guess to some degree it does. Speaking for myself, I do. I mean, I make a fairly good living, but I think it applies to a lot of people. People, for the most part, live to what their income is. Most of us, mere mortals, don't have a lot of disposable income like the top 1% do. So we, for the most part, live within our means. And some people, we go beyond that and we get into trouble, and it just adds another layer of complexity to it. But I was because of the job that I have, I was the major income earner in my house. At one point by a factor of 2. It never bothered me that much, but I think providing for a house and other people, pets included, there's a certain amount of pressure there to kind of live up to something that I may or may not be able to at times. As an example, many times in my work, the people that I was responsible for were kind of the VIPs of the company, and working with those people, and to some extent the demands that are placed upon them get transferred over to me because they need to be able to do these kinds of things in a timely manner. I need to be able to provide fixes or services within that timely manner. So that spills over into home life. And to be able to keep up with that can be difficult, or has been difficult.
Yeah, and my comment on that question would just be, I think in today's society, like, that could relate. That question can be, male or female. Like,
Oh, for sure.
yeah, absolutely. And I think it has to be these days. So yeah, it's just
and I think there's a stigma around the male historically has been the primary breadwinner of the family, but
yeah.
Like my parents, my dad owned his own business, but my mom earned more on most of the time, earned more than my dad did. His income was fairly variable, but hers was fairly steady, and she had more money. She earned more money on the average year than he did. So should the male or female be the major breadwinner in the family? It doesn't bother me one way or the other, but I know that it can in some instances where men are thought to be the breadwinners and they should be the income earners. And there's probably a portion of the population that would be intimidated by a spouse or a female in the household who's earning more than they do. There's a sense of competition there.
That'd be an interesting statistic to see.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So what I know that you, on the last show that we had, you talked about being hospitalized. And so I was just wondering if you could tell us what led to your hospitalization. Were you having panic attacks, or were you severely depressed, suicidal, or what?
All of the above, to some degree or another. A lot of depression leading up to that. I know once I was admitted, they made adjustments to my depression medication. I had been on depression medication for many, many years, well over a decade. It was the anxiety piece that was an unknown to me at the time. Part of it was stress, part of it was depression that led me to my hospitalization. But the day of hospitalization, it was, for all intents and purposes, a panic attack. I was sitting in my office and I was asked to do something that I just knew that I was not capable of doing, to the point where a lot of thoughts going through my head. There's no way in my condition, there's no way I can present myself to the people who I needed to talk to. I couldn't fix the problems, which is a frustration. It's kind of a helpless feeling. And I was expected to go there and fix something that I couldn't fix. So it was kind of a cumulative effect over probably weeks at that point. And I was sitting in my office first thing in the morning. I knew that it was not going to be a good day. And my boss came in and asked me to go do something. I said, I can't. I mean, I absolutely cannot do it. And it was that point. About 10 or 15 minutes later, I had decided that I was going to get help or something bad. And I made the choice to get help. And so I literally grabbed my phone, left everything there. And this is winter time. So in Minnesota, that's significant. You leave your coat behind and all your stuff. I took the shuttle bus down to the hospital and admitted myself into the ER. And when I was in there, I didn't know what I was experiencing. I just knew that I was in trouble. I told them I was having a nervous breakdown, because that's the best thing that I could equate it to. And watching them write on the admission slip, panic attack. First time I had ever seen that written down as a potential diagnosis for me. And in fact, it was a diagnosis for me in the end. And I made my way through the emergency room to the psychiatric ward. It was an inpatient psychiatric ward, and I was there for, I went on a Thursday, came out the following Friday.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was exactly where I needed to be. And yeah, Joseph, it was a very, very difficult decision. But it was the right thing for me to do. And once I made, interestingly enough, I made this observation. Once I made the decision to go, all of this kind of stuff kept falling off my back, for lack of a better term. I was still in trouble when I got to the ER, but it was not nearly as bad as when I was sitting in my office. And all of that started going away once I knew that I was going to be getting help. Once I got up to my room, I knew, because it's a lockdown unit, and it's a lockdown unit for a number of reasons. But it's for people exactly like me who are having suicidal tendencies or thoughts of suicide and those kinds of things that are your self-harm is very forefront in the mind. So they try to make it as safe as possible, and that includes locking the door so that people can't get out to go do something, or you're monitored very closely on the unit so that you're not doing something to yourself, because you're there for a reason. But they walk you through. It was an interesting experience because that's the first time that I started getting real information about my condition, both depression and anxiety, and started learning about what it means to have depression and anxiety, and started learning about how to deal with it, and learned a lot of interesting things.
It's interesting that you say that about the experience you had at your office before, when you knew you were really in trouble. That just took me back to a time I knew I was really in trouble when at work I was coming back from lunch, and I knew I hadn't finished this report that I was supposed to go over with my bosses. It was just an internal report, like nothing for a client or anything, nothing outward facing. And yet I hadn't finished it. And like the worst that would happen is that, they would say, you really should have finished it by now. Why don't you go finish it right now? And yet all the way driving back was like, drive in front of this semi truck, just drive in front of these cars, like cause a pileup, and like, maybe you'll die and you won't have to go and tell them that you didn't finish this report. And that's where my mind was at, is that it would be better to like seriously injure myself and potentially others.
That was your way out.
Than to ask for help.
Yeah.
And that can be where it is. So the fact that you're able to go to the hospital and ask for help, like Joseph said, is very, very difficult. And that was very brave of you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I had the exact same thoughts. As like, I'd never had active thoughts of suicide, but I was always on the passive side. It's like, maybe if I walk down to the hospital in the freezing cold and maybe a bus will run me over on the sidewalk, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Gosh, I'm sorry. It's also, it's crazy to me that you just walked into the hospital, because I've had some such like scary experiences with psych wards at hospitals. And I know this is totally random, but like, that's really brave. And if anybody's been to a psych ward at a hospital that's not a good psych ward, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I have no I have no idea of what another psych ward looks like. I can only speak from my own experience. It was interesting because I had been in the ER for other reasons before, and it was obviously very, very different. They put you in. I was put into a room that had a door on it, and plastic furniture that's bolted to the floor. It's like, okay, this is interesting. I had to remove all of my clothes, hand that all in, shoes, everything. So I had the paper gown, the whole thing. From time to time, people come in and talk to me and ask questions and all that kind of stuff. And it wasn't until, luckily enough, the facility that I went into is a fairly large complex. And I just got transferred from the ER. They wheeled me up to the psychiatric building, to that particular, I think it's the mood disorders unit, I think is the name of the unit.
And so would you say that this was kind of the beginning of your mental health journey or would you say that the depression kind of started that? And this is where we ended up.
Yeah, so the depression certainly started it several years ago. And I will say 10 years ago, because I don't remember the exact date. So it was probably at least 10 years ago. And it was, I would say, mild symptoms of depression. So I went to my general practitioner physician. This is what I'm feeling: lethargic, sleepy.
Oh, so no psychiatrist or anything, just
no, I never saw a psychiatrist until I was on the psych ward.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So I really had no idea. I didn't proactively go looking for information either. I mean, I knew what depression was. I had met most of the classic symptoms. But it wasn't until I started having what I now know are panic attacks that I thought there's something else going on. But I even then still didn't go looking to even ask my primary care physician, this is what's happening, any ideas, and get a reference to a psychiatrist or anything like that. Again, me not reaching out because it's not bad enough. It's not a big deal.
Okay. So. Oh my God. Actually, I can't say it because I would be like stereotyping genders, but like, I feel like men do tend to do that. Like, oh, everything is okay. Like it will get better, or like, I don't need to get checked down. And I say this when going to doctors specifically. I don't maybe, and I could be I totally could be generalizing. So I apologize, everybody.
Yeah, no, I think to some extent you are, but it's not untrue. So for the most part, unless my mother was a nurse, so unless we had a dismembered finger, it was fine. You put a bandage on it and you'll be fine. You didn't get to the ER, unless it was really bad, but she knew the difference. But I think even now, I mean, it took me probably a couple of years to go to my primary care physician to ask for help about depression. I didn't know about the PHQ-9s, all of the forms that you usually fill out on to gauge where your depression or anxiety levels are. Should you be seen, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. Didn't go looking for it proactively. I was thankful that I was recognized at least that much to go ask for help, but it probably took me a couple of years to say, maybe this isn't right and I need to ask. But yeah, I knew nothing about anxiety. I probably recognized it as anxiety in the last couple of years. So maybe 2 or 3 years ago, did some of my own research and said, okay, I may have, at the time I found social anxiety disorder because I get really anxious around social interactions, especially with people I don't know. But interestingly enough, having gone through the couple of programs that I've been through, they're actually, if you know how to handle them, you can switch them around. They're actually helpful. Those situations are still anxiety producing, but they can be helpful as well if you're going into them with the right tools. It's an interesting twist.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
So, as an example, was at a social event, and it was it was my wife, and we were the only ones that my wife and her boss were the only two people at this event that I knew. I didn't know anybody else. So, and it was indoors because I think it was in the fall. So you have 30, 40 people, I'm estimating, I didn't count, in this small house in this confined space. The closer, I felt like everything was closing in around me. That was my first conscious thought of there's definitely something wrong. But when I went through the 3 weeks that I spent going through the different programs, I learned how interacting, or how social interactions are beneficial for, they're necessary for people. We're social people, whether we admit it or not. You use introverts who say, no, I'm an introvert. I'm an introvert, but social interactions are actually beneficial. It depends on your mindset going into these social interactions. As an example, and I can't remember if these are actual classifications, but I put them into two classifications, or these are active socialization or passive socialization. What struck me in one of the classes that I was taking is that you can still get the social benefits while not actually interacting with people. For example, I'd go into the coffee shop, and while I don't drink coffee, I'd go in there and order a hot chocolate, and I'd be with my iPad or laptop or something like that. I'd be sitting there near other people, and for me, that was enough to get at least some social interaction, and it was completely indirect. I talked to the barista, but that was the only person that I actually interacted with. It's listening to it's hearing the conversations, not necessarily listening to them, hearing the conversations around you. And a part of it is mindfulness as well. So it's a bunch of different layers. Now, active socialization is me choosing to go interact with a friend. That's my choice. It's a friend of mine. Family interactions, those are usually fairly direct, good or bad. But those are intentional, direct interaction with people. And most of us, even if we don't get along with all of our siblings, most of the time we get some kind of benefit from those social interactions. I always thought that social interactions, especially with people I don't know, were scary. Now I come from a different point of view. It's like, I'm curious. What is this going to be like? So, like me doing this and the program from last week, a year and a half ago, I said, no way. There's absolutely no way I would do that. But when Julia asked me a couple months ago, I said, sure, I'm curious. And coming from that point of view is very, very different than hell no. There's no way I'm going to do it, and kind of forcing myself into it. So it's like, I mean, this is awesome. I never would have thought.
Well, we're so glad you decided to come on.
And I want to add that, like, I do think that in a way, this is the beginning of your mental health journey, right? Like, you're seeing the right people, you're finally on the right path and on the right meds, and that's been only like a year. And like, for you to come on here and actually talk about that, the courage that must take, like, thank you so much for doing that and being a part of this.
Yeah, it was interesting to learn all of this stuff, especially about the social stuff, right at the beginning of the pandemic. So you get out of these programs and you go, crap, I can't do any of the stuff that's going to be important to me. Now, that doesn't take away everything, but the stuff that I was looking forward to doing, socializing and those kinds of things, I can't do that anymore. So it's like trying to get over that on top of pandemic and work and all of those other things, it's like you start looking, it's like, okay, how do I deal with this? Because half my tool bag is gone because of social distancing. And but the reality is that texting a friend is also a social interaction. A lot of people don't think that, but just reaching out to talk to somebody, either text or call or whatever, that stuff is still available. FaceTime, all of those kinds of tools are still social interactions. They're not direct interactions, but you're still socializing with people.
Texting is my biggest social. That's my fear, and I've talked about this on the show. It's like it's a fear.
It's a fear it's wait, what?
The texting, I can't text back. I don't know what to say. Did I spell something wrong? Did I say something wrong? I have that overthinking analysis of what a text message should be.
Yeah.
When there's none of that. But and Joseph had a good comment as well. And one of the ways he gets better as far as approach is thinking you can learn from everyone. And I think that's
a great way to think.
Yeah, totally agree. That's a good point.
So Dan, I know, like, we all know now that depression is at least in part genetic, but what other things do you think were contributing to your depression leading up to your hospitalization or for forever?
When I took one of the books that we got in on the psych unit was a book called Mind and Emotions. That was basically the manual for the program the unit that I was on, and there was a lot of homework from that book. It's a combination of a bunch of different mental health therapies, CBT, DBT, all of those kinds of things. Is a combination. They kind of combine a bunch of the overlapping concepts and then differentiate the differences and where they differentiate. And the first part of the book, I can't remember if it's in the first or the second chapter, is this test that you go through to find out what your primary inappropriate coping skill is, for lack of a better term. They probably have a fancy name for it. But rumination and avoidance are my top two. I'm really good at avoiding stuff, and I'm really good about mulling things over in my head over and over and over and over again. I call them my horror stories, because I can come up with some really horrific stories about leading up to a social event, as an example, in the past. I'm not going to know who to talk to. I don't know who I'm going to. I don't know who I'm going to talk to. I don't know how to talk to them. I don't know what to talk to them about. They're going to judge me because I don't know what to do to talk to them, and those kinds of things. And I keep thinking about those and thinking about those and thinking about those and thinking about those, and it's nonstop. To the point where I'd get to the point where I was bad enough off that I couldn't go from a mental health standpoint. I couldn't go to those things, which is kind of debilitating, and I missed out on a lot, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
So my top two are those two things. And avoidance, I'm really good at avoiding things. I'm better at it now, but those are my top two. I can't think of all of them, but one of the other ones is emotional masking. A friend of mine, that was her top one. She would present to people what she thought they wanted to see, and hide everything underneath. So
chameleon.
Yeah. So that chapter alone taught me, okay, that makes a whole lot of sense about how my brain is thinking of things and processing things, and my behaviors as a result.
Yeah, that's very relatable. I mean, I totally relate to all three of those things: masking, ruminating, and avoidance.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we all do some of them. We all do all of them to some degree, but it's which two
Yeah.
you really are the top of your pyramid.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, that's very interesting. What was the book? Mind and Emotions?
Yep.
We'll link that below.
Very cool.
So what would you say to other men struggling with mental health issues, but they're resistant because of a stigma or just not wanting to go?
Yeah. I just go. I want to tell them, but I understand that it's a lot more complicated than that. I think the best that I can think of is, how are you feeling now versus the short term. How long have you been in pain, and how painful is it, versus the short amount of pain, probably in the short term, probably more significant pain that you'd have to go through to actually get the help that you need.
Yeah.
Is much more beneficial. That day or two, maybe a couple hours of short-term pain could actually get you to a point where you learn so much more about yourself. And if nothing else, you get proper medication if that's what you need. You may get to see a psychiatrist and a psychologist to understand more of what your condition is. And then move forward from there, because there's so much to learn about yourself in a controlled and it's a safe environment. Like I said, I was very, very fortunate where I was at. It was an extremely safe environment that you could open up, and yes, you're going to go through those little painful experiences, but to be able to talk about those things. And the first 2 days, I didn't say anything. I participated, but I didn't say anything. But after the third day, I'm talking about things that have been going on. People don't criticize you. You can kind of just talking about them in and of itself is a relief, because it's now out in the open. And those people will have both the instructors and the people in the class can give you feedback. Like we're our worst critics. Like something that you did was difficult to do, but somebody could point out, well, you did all of the right. Yes, it was painful. It sucked, but you did all the right things. Give yourself a little bit of grace and recognize the good that you did do, rather than focusing on the negative. So those is kind of a sample of the things that I learned about myself, and turn situations around in your head rather than going down this road of mental anguish.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I love, Julie, I'm going to say this. I love what you just said about, if you do go into a treatment center and you're able to interact with not just your therapist, but other people in that group, you get so much out of that. Like, I can't say that enough. And Dan, you put it so eloquently and beautifully. That's exactly what you get. Yeah. It's an amazing thing, but you can get when people come together and talk about things.
Yeah. And I forced myself. They encourage you. They don't force you. They encourage you to go to all of the sessions. And I got more from other people than I probably. No, that's not fair. I got equal amount of information and realization from other people. So I'm not the only one that has this problem. There's other people that are going through this along with me, and I can relate to everything that person just said. And that in and of itself, you kind of break down the barriers of that isolation, as well as actually learning something practical about yourself.
Well, you're back in the real world now. You have been for the last year, but you've just had this life-altering experience. It seems like you brought a lot of that with you into your current life, which is amazing. Do you feel like you're able, I know you've come on the show with us and you're talking about your mental health on the show, but this is kind of anonymous. Are you able to talk about your mental health if you need to with other people in your life, or do you still feel pressure from society to just be fine?
I certainly feel the pressure, but far less than I do, just because it's out. It's a reality that's out there. It's this kind of this in the back of your mind kind of thing. That's still there. It probably in my lifetime that won't go away. It's just because that's how we've been brought up over the years, and that's just kind of ingrained in our culture. But I also recognize when I'm getting into trouble, I know that one of the tools in my tool bag is to reach out to other people. It could be my parents, it could be my friend, it could be somebody else. As an example, a couple of weeks ago, this was, can't remember if it was before, I think it was before Christmas, the week before Christmas. I got up on a Saturday morning. I knew that I was in trouble because as soon as I got up, I started ruminating about whatever I don't remember what was going on, whatever was going on. And I knew that I was in this the typical downward spiral that people with depression get into. And I knew that I was in trouble, and then it was getting up. And I had a miniature panic attack because I couldn't remember any of my tools. I was like having a mini freak out because I couldn't remember what to do. So I had to get up and walk the dogs. I knew from the day before I had decided that I was going to go for a hike. So I got the dogs in the truck and went for a drive. Texted a friend of mine and said, "Are you available today? I'm not having a good morning. I just may need somebody to talk to, blah, 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 blah." So I had somebody lined up to talk to. They were available. They said they were available. I was going for a hike. And by the time I got there, I started calming down some. And then I started remembering all of the tools that I have to use. And hiking is actually one of them. So it was a subconscious decision. I had subconsciously reached out to a friend asking if they were around. So I'm grateful that it kind of became
second
kind
nature.
of a subconscious, subconscious second nature. But I didn't realize that till the day after that's what I did. So looking back on that day, there was a half a dozen different things that I had implemented subconsciously to get to a place where I can then start actively decompressing or stopping that downward spiral and those kinds of things. So I was grateful for that.
Hike, though, right? You drove somewhere to actually go on a hike before you were already, I mean, you weren't out of where you were, but you did that act, and just doing that act.
Yeah, you didn't get back in bed.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm grateful that I have dogs, so they have to go out. So that's kind of an ingrained, it's called a social rhythm. That's one of my social rhythms. And that's a non-negotiable social rhythm. I have to take them out.
Yeah.
So I'm lucky in that respect that I have that. And I know that some people don't have that. So it can be difficult. But even with what I've learned and implemented in the last year, to know that some of that stuff is now subconscious for me is comforting. To know that I can do that even when I'm freaking out. And today, now, because I have all of those tools that I've learned through those different programs, I call it my recovery time, but it's really the time it takes for me to recover from a downward spiral is probably more accurate. The problem doesn't go away. It just, my emotional downward spiral is interrupted much faster than it used to be. It used to take me days or weeks before that would occur. Now it's minutes or hours on the outside.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So, I mean, hugely grateful for everything that I learned.
I need to go.
Wow. You need what?
I said I need to go there. I need to learn some of these things.
Take us to this magical place, Dan.
I'd love to take everybody.
That's awesome. Katrina, did you have any other questions?
No, I just am so thankful for you to come on, Dan. And honestly, like, I'm amazed at your like being so courageous, and I can't thank you enough. Like, I wouldn't have been able to do this. So yeah.
It's to some extent it's surprising me, but it's like I said, I come from it coming from it as a curiosity perspective rather than a dreading, oh my God, am I going to freak out kind of a thing. It's to some extent it's very liberating because it's a completely different perspective and an outlook on it, and it's actually kind of fun.
Well, you're welcome back anytime.
Yeah, we're here for fun anytime.
Exactly. And we don't have to talk about you next time because that's a lot. So we can talk about other fun things.
Sure.
But I have nothing else to add. Just thank you so much. Julia, anything?
Yeah, no, I'm so grateful you were able to share this time with us. It's always a pleasure to see you. I don't get to see you enough, so I'm grateful for that. And like Katrina said, I think you're very courageous, and just your willingness is just inspiring. So
Really is.
Thank you.
And Joseph, thank you for joining us again for another great episode. And I'm trying to do some shout outs. Joseph, Kia, you're in that chat like no other. So thank you so much for being part of the show. Like, subscribe, comment, and we'll see you back next week for another episode of Baggage Claim at 8 p.m. Eastern every Tuesday night. Good night.
See you then, guys. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.